Cool. Moving on to our next talk. Very excited for. It covers, I think, one of the most important and pressing topics of our time. Sorry to set it up with so much weight, but it will cover the loneliness epidemic and the state of human connection for young people today, and what this means for brands and marketers. These two people you'll hear from are great leaders. They're super brilliant. I'm contractually obligated to say that because one is my boss and the other is my client, but they're really, really great. So please give a warm welcome to Andrew Roth from DCDX and Josh Penny from Hinge.
All righty, good afternoon. How are we feeling? Excellent. Well, very excited to be here today with you. My name is Andrew Roth. I'm the founder and CEO of DCDX. We are a Gen Z research and advisory firm helping brands like Hinge understand and attract Gen Z. And been fortunate enough to work alongside Josh, who I'd love to introduce here.
Hey, Andrew. Hi, everyone. So nice to meet you. I'm Josh Penny. I lead social impact for Hinge. Any daters in the house? Okay, that wasn't enthusiastic enough, but we love it. We love daters. I lead social impact for Hinge, which means I think about all of the ways that we realize our mission of creating a less lonely world outside of our app.
Amazing. Well, on a talk for human connection, probably makes sense to just take out your phone. No, I'm kidding. Turn around, meet someone, say hello, tell them you want to meet them at the networking session after. Real quick, say hello, turn around, turn in front of you. All righty. Save the rest of it for the networking session. Okay, so today with Josh, we're going to talk through 3 different topics. One is to just give an overview of the state of connection with Gen Z. How are young people connecting today? What does it look like, and how are they not connecting? Second, I want to make sure you really understand why you're here, right? What is the role of a brand in this conversation? What is the role of marketers and advertisers in this conversation? And finally, I want to make sure you leave not feeling depressed with actionable takeaways. Really want to make this, well, as much as we might share some sad or depressing stats, this is really an uplifting conversation and a conversation that's geared towards action. So with that, Josh, why don't you share some notes on the state of Gen Z and connection?
Yeah, I'm thinking we should have added some slides with robot urinals and to lighten the mood, but big picture, right, to understand loneliness is last May, this U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, issued a first-of-its-kind Surgeon General's advisory on loneliness. And loneliness is actually a topic that as public health workers have been talking a lot about for decades, but in the context of aging populations. What was new about this advisory is the impact that the loneliness epidemic is having on young people, on young adults, on Gen Z. There's so many things to dive into that advisory, but one of the things that really stood out to us at Hinge as we built out our social impact platform is this idea that people are actually spending far less time in person with each other than we ever have. And so if you are a young adult today, you actually get 1,000 fewer hours of in-person connection time than young adults in 2003.
Well, you might be wondering, where is that time going? We know from our research, and probably not a surprise, that young people are spending that time overwhelmingly on their devices. In our 2023 Screen Time Report, we found that Gen Zers are spending an average of 106 days per year on their phones alone. That's not including the time spent sleeping. This is total hours in the day. That's a lot. That's a lot, right? And we know that part of that is directly contributing to this loneliness crisis. We know how many young people feel lonely. 82% feel lonely frequently, sometimes or all the time. But we also know, on the flip side, how they want to feel connected. We know that 75% agree that spending time with others actually helps them reduce their feelings of loneliness, helps them feel more connected. But overall, it really creates this question, well, if they're spending so much time on their devices, but they also know that spending time with others is a solution to that, then why are we not just throwing our phones away and going to spend time with other people? Well, a lot of that is due to the relationship we have with technology, right? For a long time, Gen Z has been coined as digital natives. Has anyone heard that term, digital native? Okay, you're never going to say that word again, because in our research, we found that this is not the relationship we have with technology. We grew up alongside it, but the relationship is one of captivity. This is not digital natives, this is digital captives, right? And our relationship with technology is one of captivity. And in our research in that report, we found that 47%, nearly 1 in 2 Gen Zers, wished there was an easier way to disconnect from social media, wished it was easier to switch that off, right? And that's a really frustrating and challenging stat, because this is not like we can just make a space and tell young people to go in and have fun. There's a lot of barriers that young people face in this conversation. And even the topic today, we called this presentation low battery. Right? What that means is that in a state of constant connectivity, our capacity for connection has drained. How many of you plug your phone in all the time, like to keep it at 100%? And you've heard that, whether the iPhone doctors tell you like that drains your battery. Well, it's the same way when we're constantly scrolling on TikTok, constantly doing these scrolls, it's actually draining our capacity to meet and connect in person. So when we think about these 3 barriers, right, some of the 3 barriers that we talk about with Hinge and Safari Connection, they range across 3 different things. The first is around an overall stigma around loneliness. It is difficult to talk about this conversation. It's difficult to talk about this topic. And it's a challenge for many brands as they figure out how to enter the conversation. How do we do it in a way that's authentic to who we are and what we do? The second is around outcome anxiety. Right? Gen Z is a generation that has been coined as, convenience is so important to Gen Z, and it's true, right? We were born with our phones at our fingertips, and convenience has become a really big part of that. But what that means, right, that's the what, but the why behind it is what that means is it's actually changed our expectations. It's changed how we interact with the world around us to go from just interacting with something to actually like expecting it to be convenient, right? When we think about how we connect with other people, connection becomes very scary when you control fewer variables. Everything is controlled in the swipe in your app. But in the real world, you can't swipe someone away in the front of a conversation. You can't swipe them in front of you, right? These are real conversations, and they cause severe outcome anxiety for Gen Z, and it's a real barrier to connection. And finally, when we talk about what solutions look like, unplugging right now is one of the main solutions. This morning in the first conversation, they talked about the future being a future that is unplugged. That's the next phase of where we're going, and I hope that's true. But we also need to think about this as less of a binary topic and one that feels more open, right? Right now, the only options are stay plugged in or unplug, and that's it. But there has to be more because our friends, even if you unplug, your friends are still plugged in, and we're never going to have a world that just ditches our phones completely. So Josh, you're up here talking about Hinge and connection. What role does Hinge have in this? Is it a dating app? How are you interacting with the space?
I love that question. Are y'all familiar with Esther Perel? Do y'all listen? Yeah. She talks about a lot, actually, the burden and the weight that we bring to modern relationships. And so there's so much data. Shrinking friend groups. Most Americans have fewer than 3 friends, and that the rate of Americans that have that has doubled. Or the rate of estrangement from family has grown over the last few decades. And so what happens is we start to put all of those expectations and those needs that we would normally get met in other relationships in our life, we begin to put them on our romantic relationships. And it becomes very high pressure and very high stakes. And so Hinge's mission is about helping to create a less lonely world. And we don't think that romantic relationships are the primary vehicle for that. We think that they can be a part of a network of support that you have, but it's really important to have strong relationships with friends, family, coworkers, even loose relationships with acquaintances that maybe you just see once or twice a month, or your neighbors. All of that's important, and that's why we created One More Hour, which is our platform all about helping and supporting Gen Z in growing more in-person connection time and adding that to their daily routines.
It's amazing.
Yeah. For One More Hour, the way that we kick that off actually is a great example of how to do this in the real world. which is we launched $1 million fund to support social groups and clubs. So think about a women's DJing collective out in Brooklyn or a surf group off in Long Island, right? Those are the moments that create connection. They're activity-based. They are low pressure. People have to show up. They don't show up with the expectation that they'll make a friend, but oftentimes they do. And so we kicked that off in January and are funding about a dozen groups through that effort.
Incredible.
Andrew, I'm curious to hear from you, though, how other brands can play a role. I'm curious about your high-level takeaways there.
Yeah. I mean, so when we think about the role of brands in the conversation, there is a role for every single brand in this conversation with this topic. And there are a couple ways that we recommend kind of getting involved in the space. The first is that it's really important as a brand that there's buy-in at the organizational level, right? Entering into this space is a difficult one. We talked about the stigma around loneliness. It's very hard to just come in and come out really quickly, right? This is about how do we enter the space authentically, and that requires us to buy in. Buying in is about how do we actually integrate this into our business? How does this become part of why we exist and what we do and how we do it, right? And buying in helps to put the dollar sign in front of all this and say, how do we actually involve the organization in this so that everyone is involved, right? And that requires everything from leadership down to every single aspect of the organization. The second is about inputs, not outputs, and outcomes. Right? Josh talked about helping people just show up. If you tell a Gen Zer that, hey, come to our space and you're gonna find your community and you're gonna belong and your loneliness is gonna be over after this, it's gonna be really daunting and intimidating. But what we really recommend is emphasizing the input. Show up, right? We all know that's actually how things happen. You didn't come to this event here to check off 15 networking boxes and all these. Like, you're gonna meet people by virtue of being here. Right? It's about showing up, and that's what we recommend, and we tell young people and how they connect. And finally, it's about places, not just spaces. And this is really important to understand that it's not just about creating an area and saying, hey, here's your playpen, go for it, right? This is about how do we actually use our brand to create meaning in a space? How do we reduce some of these barriers that exist mentally by helping people become familiar, right? Add elements of familiarity and reliability, and these are ways we can start to break down some of these mental barriers and really get engaged in the space. And Josh, I know with Hinge in One More Hour, you've done quite a few different activations and launches, including the fund that you just talked about. What are some tips or tricks you would give the audience for their brands and marketers to help them really connect with Gen Z in this issue?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is don't underestimate how big of an issue this is with loneliness. It's an issue that people experience alone, and often it's not visible when people are going through things. And so that's top of mind. I think, Andrew, you talked about buy-in and having it from the top down. Maybe you have a lot of work to do to convince your leadership at your company or agency to work on this, but there are a lot of tactical level things that you can do to start helping foster connection in some of your marketing, right? It can start with thinking about how do I add to this brief a way for people to connect in person. If I am having an event or an IRL activation, how do I help people go a little bit deeper? How do I help them start conversations? How do I actually intentionally create ways for people to connect at the event? I guess that's a plug for the mixer after this. And then I think the last thing that's really important anytime you market to Gen Z is actually, and this is a principle that we use at the Hinge marketing team a lot, is it's important to build with, not for. And so you want to think about how you bring Gen Z voices into your work. And ideally, you're bringing them in early and often. One of the ways and one of the reasons that we work with DCDX is actually because they're a Gen Z-led market research firm. And it's really fun to work with them without the expectation that any campaign, tied to any campaign or any one project, but we actually just do lots of deep dives and learnings on topics that we're interested in. And that's one way that we sort of incorporate Gen Z voice throughout the whole process. I'm curious, Andrew, what you would offer to everyone about creating sort of like action steps around fostering more connection.
Yeah. And first of all, when we talk about buy-in as an organization, I just want to shout out the entire Hinge. There's seven or eight folks from the Hinge team here. Just give a round of applause. Like that's what buy-in looks like. Showing up for Josh and the team. I love that. That's amazing. Super cool to see. Hasn't been done yet today. Anyways, as far as tips and tricks for how we think about what it looks like to actually implement some of these changes into your organization. The first thing we talked about was places and not just spaces. Right? Again, places are how do we actually as a brand create areas for young people to gather and again putting our brand in the conversation so that we can reduce some of the barriers that exist. Right? One of the reasons young people are not going out to bars and meeting each other and all these things is there's a lot of that outcome anxiety. And so to reduce some of that outcome anxiety, we can create places like some of the clubs that you mentioned, some of the things that Hinge is sponsoring through the One More Hour Fund. Those are some of the ways that we can create some places to help people connect and meet IRL. The second is about programs, right? Places are where belonging can happen. Programs is what enable them and fuel them, right? Programs is where you start to add that element of consistency in that really helps to build that familiarity into the conversation. Right? It's not just once that your brand has shown up into the conversation, it's multiple times. And that's the type of consistency that also is brought across in what your brand stands for. It's we talk about all the time how a brand sometimes can show up for one thing and then ditch and never talk about it again. This is the consistency that is required to create meaningful impact in the space. And finally, if there's one thing I leave you all with today, it is this. For a long time, sustainability has been a big part of the conversation, right? Everyone knows when the environment started, when polar caps started to melt, they're like, hey, we should pay attention to this, right? And then brands were like, oh my gosh, great, let's do it. We're going to implement it into our corporate social responsibility program. We're going to tell all our stakeholders that we're doing a great job here. And you did it, right? Like, that's amazing, and that's important. Well, the next most important thing that's happening right now is loneliness. And it is entirely possible for you to build loneliness into your purpose as a brand. Why you exist can be to help people connect. Just as why you exist can help to build a more sustainable future, you can exist to help people become more connected. And that's a meaningful and just cause that I don't think people understand today. And again, walk away with anything but this, that in Gen Z's eyes and in our eyes, that's what creates meaning and that's what can create impact.
I think I'll just add, if I can give you all some homework after this, is plan a friend date. Call up a friend, text a friend that you haven't talked to in a while, and make plans to hang out. And getting in that cycle of inviting and creating these moments in our personal lives work wonders. And really, the solutions to loneliness, they are simple. And we're all well equipped to do it today. We don't have to wait for a savior to come and to eradicate this issue. We all have the tools, the ability to foster connection with people in our daily lives.
Yeah, amazing. And last thing, before we open up some Q&A, we've talked a lot about solutions for loneliness and unplugging, and the DCDX team, also, again, last October, we released a report called Digital Natives to Digital Captives, How the Internet Changed Gen Z. It got a lot of great attention, so we were like, hey, let's do a little more investigation into this. And so for the YMS audience today, we're doing an early release of our part 2, From Digital Natives to Digital Captives, How the Pursuit of Unplugging. So if you want to scan the QR code, it's available now. No one else has it yet. Super cool, I know, amazing. I don't even think you've seen it yet.
I haven't.
Okay,
no.
there you go. There you go.
I'm going to download it right now.
We sent it to you, but yeah. Anyways, thank you for the time. Really appreciate it. Open to questions and discussion.
My mic's on. Oh, does anyone have any questions for our two speakers?
So I loved the sort of visual that you were talking about and kind of building on the case to be made about fostering a better connection with your consumers. Like sustainability, I feel like a lot of the conversation exists at the beginning and then there isn't a lot of follow through, or it gets too nuanced that consumers are no longer interested, or it's no longer their top priority to understand how they're attacking scope 1, 2, 3, et cetera. in the context of loneliness or purpose more broadly, what is your advice when it comes to kind of continuing that connection through purpose to make sure it doesn't feel like it's just a start and stop?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this. This is a wonderful question. I think one of the lessons that we can take away from the climate conversation is that when actually you talk about, when you paint the picture that the world is ending, people feel sad and they feel doom. They don't feel motivated to actually take the actions that are required to sort of address it. And that's not to lay blame at anyone, but what I would hope for this issue actually is that brands find ways to make connection and IRL really fun, really joyful, make it so that people, whatever's happening outside in the world is so much more interested in what's happening on your phone. And I feel like that's the way that we'll see continuity, and because people respond well to it, and people feel something when they're connecting. I don't know if would have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, just to add in, like, I think it's about listening to your audience, right? And if your audience continues to tell you they want to connect and they're feeling lonely, then keep offering them that option. I mean, it's really as simple as that. It's the way the solutions for the climate crisis work too. It's just continue to listen. It's clearly impacting our purchase decisions, even in the kind of the value-oriented shopping. So this is another value that is really able to implement into what you do, and people will listen and respond. Got the mic.
It's totally fine. Hi, I'm Mia. My question is, I've been seeing a lot of conversation recently about how, due to this loneliness epidemic, Gen Z has been going to social platforms, specifically like TikTok, to seek forms of connection. Do you see that as being counterproductive since it is online, or do you think that a place like TikTok could be a valid place/space to fight loneliness?
Yeah, good question. So I think, and this is something we've looked at a lot, like I think there is a difference between connectivity and connection, right? Connectivity is what allows us to feel connected, but it's not actually what's connecting us physically, right? And I think like TikTok is really dangerous because it gives you that feeling, and Instagram and all these platforms, like they're great, and they have a lot of positives in the world, and obviously we're here for many reasons because of them, but also it's kind of this false promise of connection that is really being offered. So there are really good examples of how comment sections have turned into gatherings. I think the New York Times had a great article recently on how that's happened. But it's also like, what happens if TikTok's gone? Like, I know there's a lot of conversations that maybe that's a good thing. Who knows?
Yeah, I'll just add that there are places online where people are finding that connection, right? And I think about queer kids who grow up in a small town and don't have access to people who are like them, and find those communities online. And like, where do they go? Discord, I think. So some corners of the internet, and those are very like intentionally curated and cultivated places. And I think there are places like that on the internet. And our job is how, especially Hinge as a tech company, is how we think about connecting these online spaces to the real world.
Thank you.
You turned me on. Oh, hello. Thanks for the questions. That's all we have time for now. But give it up for Andrew and Josh one more time.